Hello, everyone. I am happy to be here with you all. Happy to see your faces and the memories of the times that I was at the Dallas Meditation Center in person were very nourishing to me, nourish me in this moment, and help to propel my practice as well. So, my topic for today is the shore of non-fear. I partake in facilitating many sanghas, and I enjoy the process exponentially. And a few questions that have come up in these sanghas, including the Dallas Meditation Center, is what do we do about fear? The energy of fear is something that can be very powerful, something that can make it harder to practice the path of mindfulness, something that can potentially overtake our minds when we're mired in a state of fear. So, what do we do with our fear? How can we cultivate what's called abhaya or non fear, which is a teaching that Tai and the Buddha bring to us? How can we water the seeds of non fear when there are so many reasons to be afraid in the world today? So, my first question to you all, Bobby mentioned I'm the teacher today, but I also enjoy learning a lot from the Sangha. So, my first question to you all is what are some common fears? What do you think people are most afraid of? That could be people in the community, in the United States, in the world. We're all human beings together, subject to certain conditions in our lives. What are some of the things you all think are common fears that maybe have a tendency to take over people's minds, or things people perhaps tend to worry about or struggle with when it comes to fear? So I'll go ahead and bow out. If anyone would like to bow in, please share what are some common fears and maybe try to keep your share brief so that everyone has time to share.
Still bowing in. One fear is not having enough money to pay my bills.
Fear of snakes.
Them bowing in, fear of the loss of um, property or belongings, um, being mugged, or losing your apartment, your house.
Bowing in. Fear of judgment.
Paula bowing in, fear of not belonging.
Okay, thank you all for sharing. I'll go ahead and bow back in. I hope I didn't cut someone off that was talking. There's the mic there. So, fear of not belonging, fear of losing property, fear of not having enough financially. There's fear of dying, fear of something traumatic happening to us. Perhaps something already has happened to us that's traumatic, and we fear that same thing happening again. There's a lot of fear of political injustice happening, people losing their jobs, people losing their homes, the prices of living rising, and the fear that we'll be left alone, that we'll be lonely, that we may not have someone around us to understand us, to be with us, or maybe even the fear that we won't be loved in the way that we crave to be loved, perhaps in our intimate relationships or in our friendships. This fear of being misunderstood, unloved, neglected. These are real fears that we have, and it's important not to pretend like they don't exist, not to say, I'm not afraid of anything, and just leave it at that. But there is an important aspect of our practice where we need to embrace our fears and look deeply at our fears so that we can transform that energy into something else, something that's perhaps more beneficial, something that can be a form of generosity to others. So I'd like to read a few quotes and share a few thoughts about fear before I transition into non-fear. I discovered this quote from Daido Lori Roshi recently while listening to a Dharma talk that I liked. It says, confined in a cage, up against a wall, pressed against barriers. If you linger in thought, holding back your potential, you will remain mired in fear and frozen in inaction. If, on the other hand, you advance fearlessly and without hesitation, you manifest your power as a competent adept of the way, passing through entanglements and barriers without hindrance. The time and season of great peace is attained. So how do we get from a state where we're afraid and frozen in inaction to where we can proceed fearlessly and pass through all sorts of hindrances and barriers to get to our goal, to get to our ideal, to persist in doing the aspirations that we have in our lives? So when you look at the word fear, a parallel word is afraid, the sense of being afraid of something. Perhaps it's just one moment of fear. Maybe you're hiking on a trail and you see a bear and the bear passes by and doesn't harm you. Perhaps it's a longer term fear that can generate into a sense of worry, such as not belonging or perhaps not being good enough, which I think is a major fear that many people have. And the word afraid, if you listen to the syllables in that word, the word frayed is there. So when something is frayed, like the edge of a carpet, it's very worn down and very derelict, you might say. It's been toyed with, rubbed against fiercely, and it's kind of frayed on the edges. It's going to be hard to work with that material if you're weaving a cloth or a jacket or something like that. Similarly, our minds, when we're in a state of being afraid for a long period of time, it's like they're rubbed down and it's harder to have some stability, something to grasp a hold of, to work with in that moment. So we want to be able to acknowledge our fear, acknowledge our afraidness, and also to be able to move past it. I would like to share two stories, a bevy of quotes, and then a few more stories that have to do more with non-fear. So the first two stories I have to do with fear itself. The first one is a story. I'm going to summarize a short story written by Anton Chekhov, a famous Russian short story writer. And it goes something like this. This story is called The Death of a Government Clerk. And the scene is there's this government clerk who's sitting at an opera, and he's sitting right behind a high-ranking government official. And the government official is watching this opera and the clerk is sitting right behind him. And all of a sudden, without expecting it, the clerk sneezes right on the government official's head in front of him. And he feels this panic, this worry, this fear arise because he's just sneezed on this very important person's head. And in that moment, he reaches forward and kind of taps the guy on the shoulder. And he says, "Sir, please forgive me. I did not mean to sneeze on your head." And the guy turns around and he basically says, "Can't you be quiet? I'm trying to listen to this opera." And so the clerk who sneezed still feels extremely worried. He says, he hasn't forgiven me. He's going to manifest this anger towards me in this bureaucratic system I'm in, and he's going to fire me. He's going to do something bad to me. He's going to ruin my position, my progress that I've made in this government structure. So the opera ends. He quickly tries to apologize again to the government official, and the official still just kind of brushes him off and says, "Just go home and go to sleep." And yet he still worries. He still has this fear. I've sneezed on this important man. What am I going to do? How can I make this right? How can I forgive him? So his fear just continues to compound. And the next day he goes to the government official's office and waits a long time to get to see him and says to him again, "Sir, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me for sneezing on you. I really didn't mean to do it. I'm just in this state of almost despair because I'm worrying so much about it." And again, he says, "Wow, you're still thinking about that? That's silly. Get out of my office right now." The important government official still doesn't forgive him. And he goes home and he continues to worry and worry and worry. And the short story ends and it says he goes home and lays down on his couch and falls asleep and dies. That's the end of the story. The fear in his mind is so strong that it overcomes him and wears him down to the point where he dies. That story was very striking to me. It's one of the most famous Russian short stories. And I think there is a nugget of truth there, that these energies that we can persist in doing in our minds can have an effect on our bodies, on our physiology, and they can take over our mind and our body in some ways. When we have this sense of worry that's so strong that it can lead to, that's all we think about. When we're trying to sleep, it's there. When we're awake, it's there. I've experienced this before in my life when I was a young child, this sense of helplessness and fear overshadowing pretty much everything that I did. And over time, through the sense of impermanence, it gradually just changed and passed. And I heard a quote once that said, "When you're afraid of something every day, that's the first thing you think about. But one day you'll wake up and that will be the second thing that you think about." Meaning that sometimes it happens through the practice of mindfulness and meditation, and sometimes it happens through the process of simply impermanence. The thing we're worried about might shift and gradually go down in our list of priorities or things that we think about. The second story I have about fear is something related to the effect that fear might have on our lives. And this is another short story. I call it the eagle chicken story. In this one, a farmer finds an egg on the ground and he places it in the chicken coop thinking that it's a chicken egg. A little bit of time passes and the egg hatches, and it turns out that it's a baby bald eagle inside of the egg. However, the bald eagle is born into this environment of chickens, so it sees all these chickens around it and it thinks itself a chicken. So it grows up, walking around like a chicken, clucking like a chicken, doing all the things a chicken does. And everything's fine and dandy with that scenario until one day a glorious bald eagle flies over the chicken coop, soaring through the sky in this magnificent free way, just riding the waves of air that are high up there in the sky. And the bald eagle that's stuck in the chicken coop looks up at the bald eagle soaring in the sky and says, wow, I wish I could fly like that. And the bald eagle that's in the chicken coop continues to act like a chicken for the rest of its life. Or maybe it takes off and starts to learn to fly. But that is one of the effects of fear, that there's this sense of internal freedom, there's this sense of compassion, there's these qualities of loving kindness and understanding that we can develop. And if we listen to our fear, it has this effect of kind of shrinking our lives, of reducing our potential, as the quote said earlier, of bringing us to a state where the worry and the fear is what's directing our life rather than our sense of love and our sense of potential possibility. As a social worker, I've worked with many clients, and one of them had this problem where at one point she went out, I'm changing some of the details to keep it confidential, obviously, but at one point she went out to the grocery store and she witnessed someone being mugged on the way out of the grocery store. And so gradually she went home and she experienced a lot of fear as a result of that. She said, okay, I can't go to that grocery store. So she went home and she started watching the news and getting a lot of these stories of crime that was happening in her community. She decided, well, I can't really go to any grocery stores anymore. I'll have to order it in. Then gradually she decided, well, I don't really feel safe actually like leaving my house anymore. So there's this kind of shrinkage that happens backwards. And then she decided, well, I don't really feel that safe like even going out in my backyard anymore. I have so much anxiety and worry and it just gets kicked up whenever I go in my backyard. So I'm going to stay inside. And then she decided, well, the living room has these open windows where people can see into my house, but the bedroom is more safe. So I'm going to do my best to just stay in the bedroom as much as I can. That's where it's safe. And that way I'll be able to avoid any danger and mitigate any risk that may arise. And that was the point where I started seeing her for counseling and social work. The problem arose when her loved one, her granddaughter, had a high school graduation coming up, and there was no Zoom capacity to do it. There was no online way to join that Zoom capacity. So she had this thing that she loved greatly, her great granddaughter, and she had all this fear preventing her from going out, wanting her to stay where it's safe all the time. And she had to make the choice to overcome her fear, to choose the thing that she loved and support that and overcome her fear. And gradually, through doing that and a lot of other self-soothing therapeutic practices, she was able to expand again. So fear can be seen as the thing that shrinks our lives, shrinks our aspirations. And love can be seen as something that helps us to grow and to further our aspirations, to do things that are courageous. So there's a line that Rilke, the poet Rilke, said. There's two quotes that he had that I really like. One of them says, "Our deepest fears are like dragons guarding our deepest treasure." Our deepest fears are like dragons guarding our deepest treasure. The voice of fear says, don't look into it. Just listen to what I say. Just be afraid. Don't look deeply into it. But when we practice mindfulness, we gain the quality of investigation. We don't have to simply listen to our fear. We can look deeply within and say, what is the root of this fear? Where is this coming from? Perhaps you'll ask yourself, what is this treasure that you're hiding from me? A connected quote by Rilke says, perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Maybe we've all had that experience before of there's something we're afraid of, and we take a step back, maybe we practice, maybe we talk to someone we trust, and suddenly we have these resources to where we can face down the thing we're afraid of. And it turns out that it wasn't all that bad. That in our mind has the capacity to make these monsters in our lives. And when we face it, when we actually go and do the thing, at least in my experience, it's been a lot less hard than what I feared, what I imagined it to be. So when we talk about cultivating non-fear and we have this sense of mindfulness, this presence, this investigation, this ability to look deeply, we can do the thing we're afraid of. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Do the thing you fear, and the death of the fear is certain." When we're young children, there's so many things that we do to pass developmental milestones. We walk, we learn to talk, we learn to read, we learn to write, we learn to be social, we learn to make art. Our life is constantly growing and expanding. And I'm sure for many children, we experience things that we're afraid to do. Maybe riding a bike, maybe going swimming. And yet, if we have the right support, if we have the right resources, if we have people around us that are encouraging us, helping us to build up courage, we'll be able to do those things. And after we've done those things that we're afraid of, it seems like it's just everyday life. We don't even think about it anymore. So once we do the thing we're afraid of, it can become transformed to where it's just our everyday life, just something we're doing in each day. It's part of our ordinary life. I wanted to make 2 more points and then tell some stories about courage that have inspired me in this practice. I'd like to distinguish between fear and caution. I think that's an important distinction to make, that it's important to be cautious in one's life. For example, while driving. We know that while driving, there are many people on the road that are probably texting and driving, eating and driving, not really paying attention. There are many people that may be under the influence of something while driving. We've all heard stories or maybe been involved in situations where wrecks have happened, and it's a scary situation for sure. Being on the road, we have to be very cautious, very vigilant, We have to pay attention. And if we're worrying a lot, that energy can take away from our ability to really be present while driving, to really pay attention while driving. So we want to be cautious and try not to water those seeds of fear as well. So the movie Dune has recently come out, the science fiction movie. And I read the book while I was in college and really enjoyed the book Dune, about a young man who is kind of seen as the chosen one, who is to go down to this country. He's from a world where he's used to having plenty of water and kind of tropical scenarios, and he has to go down to this desert dwelling world to essentially make things right and establish order there. And there's an interesting point where he comes to this training before he departs for the desert world. And he has to stick his hand into this box. And in the box, once he sticks his hand in the box, he gets shocked with this incredible amount of pain. and he has to find a way to deal with it with a calm mind. And he has these teachers that help him to prepare for this kind of rite of passage that he has. And so he recites this thing called the Litany Against Fear, which I found very powerful and inspiring. And this is the Litany Against Fear. It says, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. I heard that before I was serious about my Buddhist meditation practice. And now that I'm in this practice, I feel that the litany against fear really resonates. This dedication to face our fear, to look at it. And when we start to look at it, it becomes impermanent. It will change. It will transform. And it won't persist. It will turn into something else, and only I will remain. I think when we talk about non-fear, what we're saying is that, yes, we're afraid. Yes, our hearts may pound and we may get anxious or nervous before a certain event, before meeting a certain person, before doing a goal. But when we talk about non-fear, it's this sense that there's something within us that can embrace that fear. That just because we're afraid, we don't have to step away and not do the thing that we were going to do. That we can meet it with courage and proceed, even though there's part of us that's afraid. We can continue to do this aspiration or this goal that we have. So I'd like to share a few more stories of non-fear on the path of mindfulness. One of my favorites is the story of the Buddha and Angulimala. Angulimala means, mala means necklace, and anguli means fingers. So Angulimala was a famous murderer who had killed, the numbers are somewhere around 100 people in the area where the Buddha was living and practicing. And after Angulimala killed each person, he would slice their finger off and make a necklace of fingers to wear. He had this mala of fingers of people that he had killed. You can picture this savage character known for slaughtering other beings and the fear that that gives rise to. So the Buddha was practicing near Angulimala, and the village people had heard that Angulimala was coming, and they all manifest their fear. They all go inside, not only inside their houses, but they go and hide in their closets. They try to make as little noise as possible, and the town basically turns into a ghost town. And they all said to the Buddha, do not go out there. You're going to get killed. Angulimala is this savage murderer. But the Buddha said, well, I need to go on my alms round every day. So I'm going to go out and beg with my begging bowl, do my mindful walking practice like you all just did in this room today, and basically see what happens. The Buddha essentially said, I'm not going to succumb to this fear. I'm going to go out there and practice, which is the path that we all have to walk in our everyday lives. We have to leave our homes. We have to get out there into the world, into society, and hopefully do so in a mindful way. The Buddha started walking, printing peace on the earth with each step, in complete mindfulness and total concentration. And Angulimala came up behind him, sprinting after him. Angulimala was sprinting, but somehow he couldn't catch up to the Buddha, even though the Buddha was walking very slowly. And so Angulimala calls out and says, "Contemplative, stop. I have something to tell you." It would have been more accurate for him to say, "I would like to kill you." But the Buddha keeps walking as if he hadn't heard Angulimala. He keeps walking patiently, and Angulimala keeps sprinting, and he keeps saying, "Stop, stop, contemplative." Finally, the Buddha turns around mindfully, his eyes filled with compassion, and he looks at Angulimala, and he says, "O Angulimala, I have stopped long ago on the path. It is you who have not stopped." And Angulimala says, what does that mean? He's thrown off. And the Buddha says, "I have stopped doing acts that create suffering for other beings. It is you who have not stopped doing that." And Angulimala is kind of shocked into this position of curiosity, of openness. Maybe he's inspired by the Buddha's show of non-fear, and he starts talking with the Buddha, and they have this conversation where the Buddha basically says, "You too can have this path of liberating yourself and ceasing to create suffering for other beings." And Angulimala wants to do it, and he decides to take the 5 precepts, the 5 mindfulness trainings, and he becomes a monk and generates this great sense of serenity and compassion, and he's totally transformed. That line is similar to that Rilke quote I shared earlier. Perhaps all those dragons, those things we fear, are really princesses waiting to transform once we confront them with beauty and courage. When we learn to meet the challenges in our life with beauty and courage instead of with fear, perhaps things will transform in front of our eyes. I think that's one of the core lessons of non-fear. And the way we cultivate it is through our mindful practice of deep breathing, of mindful walking, of coming to a Sangha and perhaps sharing our fears with people that are really present and not judging us, that are practicing compassionate speech and deep listening, which is an extremely special gift that we can have, and also that we can give to others. I'm reminded of stories of Thich Nhat Hanh, where he was confronted with the threat of deportation, with the threat of exile, with the threat of separation from his beloved community. Many of those things did happen. He was exiled. I'm reminded of Sister Chan Kong, who went out to serve people who had been caught in the middle of the Vietnam War. And she talks about bullets flying over her head, and still trying to have this heart of compassion, of getting out there every day and serving the wounded, of feeding the poor, of assisting people, and not letting that fear of getting killed, getting shot, getting napalm dropped on her, draw her back. And she said her mindful practice of deep breathing was very helpful. Also chanting the Heart Sutra, which is a famous sutra in Buddhism, really helped her to cultivate that stability to continue to serve and to literally save people's lives that were out there on the edge, dying from warfare, which I think is probably, being in the midst of a war is probably one of the scariest things that human beings can experience. And so to see Thich Nhat Hanh and Sister Chan Kong and many others continuing to practice this way of courage and love and service in the midst of a war is very inspiring. So I'll close with one more story, story after story. I've been inspired by an American example, reading about the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 50s, and how there were many Blacks, not only blacks and people of color, but also whites that joined along with them in this struggle for justice to desegregate restaurants in the South, and the freedom riders, particularly, that had this ideal of a vision for a just world, a vision of a world that was not separated by this arbitrary thing we call skin color and race, where they could go into a restaurant and not have cigarettes put out on their heads, not have coffee, hot coffee poured on their heads. And in the worst cases, there were examples of civil rights activists, young black men who would go in these buses to places that were renowned for their hatred of black people, hatred of people of color. And they would go into those places intentionally, knowing that they were going to face trials, they were going to be beaten, that they might even be killed. And there's something in them that has this courage. Perhaps it's this tiredness. They're tired of enduring this injustice. They don't want to see their children and grandchildren endure this injustice. And they take these buses down to these places that are simmering with hatred. Perhaps it's a hatred based on fear underneath the hatred that's spawned by racism. Perhaps there's this fear that these other people will take what's good in our society, that they will destroy our society. But in trying to protect against that fear, there's this corruption that comes about as a result of it. So I gained this inspiration of non-fear from seeing these civil rights activists go down into places of hatred in order to bring love to those places, in order to bring justice, in order to bring about a new world, and seeing that work is still being done in today's world in some ways. Whether it's civil rights struggles, or just the struggle for acceptance, or just the struggle for giving love, or doing acts of courage and not being bogged down by our fear, we have to learn to cultivate this seed of non-fear in order to bring about the world that we all want to live in. I'll go back to the quote that I started with to close. If you linger in thought, holding back your potential, you will remain mired in fear and frozen in inaction. If, on the other hand, you advance fearlessly and without hesitation, you manifest your power as a competent adept of the way. Passing through entanglements and barriers without hindrance, the time and season of great peace is attained. Thank you all for listening and for your presence.